They described his crime scenes as some of the worst they've ever seen and called them houses of carnage. Hey friends, hope you're doing well. If you're new here, I'm a forensic psychology student and I talk about true crime. Today we're going into the case of the Vampire of Sacramento, Richard Chase. Now this case is very graphic and disturbing, so if that's not for you, I'll see you in the next video. Richard Trenton Chase was born May 23, 1950 in Santa Clara County, California. He had a younger sister named Pamela, and his parents were known to argue a lot. His mom would accuse his dad of things such as cheating on her, trying to poison her, a lot of kind of crazy things. And his dad was known to discipline him pretty heavily, but for the time period that it wasn't anything really out of the normal, as it was described. By age 5, Richard showed all 3 parts of the McDonald triad, which is used to show signs of sociopathy. This includes violence or cruelty to animals, bedwetting past age 6, and obsession with fire setting. Richard was also a heavy drug user. He started using marijuana and LSD, and he also discovered that he was impotent as a teenager, which also caused him a lot of issues. However, despite this, he was known as being pretty popular and clean-cut in high school, and then more withdrawn and unkept in his adulthood years as his mental health worsened. When he was a teenager, he started to believe he was part of the James Younger gang. He would cut out pictures of his face and paste them onto their bodies. He even asked his mom to buy him a cowboy hat for him, but she said no. Richard did get a girlfriend in 1965, but they ended up splitting in 1966 due to his impotency issues. He attended American River College from 1968 to 1971, but ended up dropping out due to his drug use and behavioral issues. Richard had developed hypochondria. He would believe that his heart would stop beating. He would rub oranges on his head to diffuse the vitamin C into his brain, and he even believed that the bones in his cranium were moving, so he shaved his head to monitor this activity. In 1971, Richard got an apartment with Sid Evans DeMarchi and Rachel Statham, but they ended up moving out because of his odd behaviors. He would walk around the house without clothes on, he would barricade himself in his room, other odd things. After this, he moved in with Rachel Statham's brother and his bandmates, and again, they also ended up moving out because of his weird behavioral issues. At this point, his dad had kind of cut him off financially. He believed that he was lazy with no work ethic. He also started fighting with his mom a lot because he started believing that his mom was trying to poison him. In June of 1972, Richard's parents divorced, and at this point, again, his relationships with them were rocky, and he once got into an argument with his mom, and she tried to call the police on him, and he hit her over the head with the phone. Chase returned to Sacramento in the summer of 1973, and at this point he had started cutting out pictures of human organs from medical books and pasting them all over the walls of his room, trying to find out what was wrong with him. Richard went to his mom begging her for help to figure out what was wrong with him, and she gave him 2 doctors to go to, but both said that there was really nothing wrong with him other than his hypochondria. This really made him mad. He also at one point watched a news story about this cat that received all these medicines and treatment, etc., and he was so mad at this that he killed his own cat because he believed that he should be getting treatments and medicine and stuff. In December of 1973, Richard went to American River Hospital claiming that he was short of breath, that he was having a cardiac arrest, that his blood had stopped flowing, and then he ended up staying in a mental hospital. He spent 2 days there, and they diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. At this point, he started using heavy drugs again, and his mental state worsened. He started accusing his sister Pamela of trying to control him. He would get violent with his mom at some occasions, and just overall started believing all these crazy things. At this point, Richard's parents couldn't really handle him living with them or his behavior, so they got him an apartment of his own. Richard started consuming animals. He would go to a rabbit farm, purchase the rabbits, and consume them. Later in 1976, he was committed involuntarily to a mental hospital after he injected the rabbit's blood into his own veins. During this stay, they nicknamed him Dracula because of his obsession with blood. He was known to be withdrawn, he wouldn't participate in activities, but they eventually deemed him no longer a danger to society and released him, even though the staff of the hospital disagreed with this. One of the staff members said that he needed extensive care and wasn't receiving the care that he needed to have. After he was released, his mom started weaning him off of the drugs without consulting the doctors because she didn't like that it made him act like a zombie. But after he was off his medication, he went from consuming rabbits to consuming puppies. He would get the puppies, he would hang them in his room, slice them open, drink their blood, eat them. In August of 1977, Richard was arrested after being found with blood all over him and a liver in his possession, but it was eventually found to be cow's blood and nothing ever really came of it. In December of 1977, Richard went out and bought a .22 caliber pistol. To do this, he lied about his mental state. He started shooting at the walls in his apartment, trying to shoot the voices that he heard. He also started shooting the dogs that he would get in the head because it helped him drink the blood faster if he put a cup next to the bullet wound. On December 29th, 1977, Richard was involved in a drive-by shooting, and this was his first human victim. The police at first thought it was just a random incident, but he later ended up telling them that it was because he was mad at his mom for not inviting him over for Christmas. But the reason she didn't invite him was because in front of her, he had ripped open a cat and smeared the cat's blood all over himself. He then started breaking into people's houses. He would urinate on their beds. He would try to steal their belongings. He broke into the house of some neighbors he believed to be spying on him, trying to drive them out of the neighborhood. On January 23rd, 1978, Richard broke into the home of Teresa Wallen, who was 3 months pregnant at the time, and shot and killed her. He then engaged in necrophilia with the corpse. He removed her organs, he laid them around her, he drank her blood, he cut off one of her nipples, and he shoved dog feces down her throat. Her body was found by her husband. Unfortunately, it was also determined that she was actually still alive during some of the mutilation. Then on January 27th, Richard broke into the home of Evelyn Maroth and killed her. This included Evelyn's friend, Dan Meredith, and Evelyn's 6-year-old son, Jason. He shot them all in the head and then mutilated the body of Evelyn Maroth. There was semen found in her body, which showed that despite his impotency, he was able to get an erection and have sexual intercourse with her corpse, which is sick because he's been impotent all up until now. Richard drank all of their blood. He also stated that he was only semi-conscious during this, so they couldn't even really figure out the whole timeline of exactly when things happened, also because of how much he moved around the bodies and such. Evelyn's 22-month-old nephew, David Ferrero, was also in the house. Richard had shot him in the head while he was in the crib and then cut part of the back of his skull so he could drink his blood. Now, Richard then fled with the body of David Ferrero, the baby, in Meredith's car and went back to his apartment where he then decapitated the corpse of this baby. He then consumed parts of the baby's brain, and when asked why, he simply said, because he was hungry. Yeah, makes me nauseous just thinking about it. Now, when Richard was at the house, a 6-year-old neighbor girl had knocked on the door because her family had plans with the people inside. And then she ended up going back home saying no one answered. They alerted the police, and that is when they walked into this horrific crime scene. They had immediately connected it to the Wallen murder because of the nature of the crime, and they put together a profile of the person they were looking for, believing it to be a white man in his 20s who was mentally ill, unkempt, dirty, and that he also had been wearing an orange ski jumper at the time because neighbors reported seeing him walking around, going to house, knocking on doors. Nancy Westfall was a high school acquaintance of Richard, and after these descriptions came out, she went to police saying she had remembered seeing him and talking to him and that he was wearing an orange ski jumper, that he hadn't recognized him at the time, but that she did now, so they were able to get a name and pull him up in the system. Police went to Richard's apartment and he would not let them in, so they acted like they were leaving in order to draw Richard out, and when they did get him out of his own apartment, that's when they arrested him and then searched his place. They found blood all over his walls, dog collars, rotting organs, bullet holes in the wall. He was reading gun magazines, psychology magazines, psychic books. He also had the word today written all over his calendar. Richard was not cooperative with the police. He claimed he was being framed and that he didn't do any of this, that he had only hurt the animals. He then started talking a lot about UFOs, people tracking him, people trying to poison him, etc. He also started claiming that he was a persecuted Jew, even though he wasn't, and he tried to get an attorney from the Jewish Defense Council, but that was denied. In 1979, he went to trial facing 6 counts of murder and the death penalty. They tried to get it down to second-degree murder, claiming that he was temporarily insane, but that was also denied, and he ended up being charged with all 6 counts of murder and sentenced to death in the gas chamber. Richard told the jury that he was a good person, but that he had a weak heart and weak mind. During the trial, Teresa Wallen's husband spoke during the victim impact statements, and Richard's mother told him that his German Shepherd should have protected them. Like, what? And so, of course, he went and said, well, you should have protected us from your son. Like, blaming the dog is crazy. Richard went to San Quentin prison, and while he was there, the inmates actually tried to convince him to commit suicide because they learned about all the horrific things he had done. He was then temporarily sent to an institution for the criminally insane. In April 1980, he was again deemed to be stabilized and sent back to San Quentin prison. During one of his interviews with a psychologist, he claimed he was being poisoned from a young age by dish soap, that there were UFOs, that he was born with a Jewish star on his head, that he was being persecuted. Again, all of his delusions were only increasing. He also gave the interviewer a bunch of mac and cheese that he was hoarding in his pockets because he believed the food at the prison was poisoned. On December 26, 1980, at 11:06 a.m., Richard Chase was found deceased in his prison cell. He had died from an overdose of Sinequan, a drug that was used to treat hallucinations, and it turns out that he had been hoarding the pills unbeknownst to the guards, and he took 36 times the normal dose. Next to him were a bunch of papers with handwriting on them. Some of them just had random codes, and some of them had his writing saying that he was thinking about taking pills that would stop his heart from beating. It is unclear whether the intention he had was to end his life or just to quiet the voices in his head, but it was deemed a suicide. Anyways, that is all that I have on the case of Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. This one was very disturbing, very insane, so let me know what you think in the comments or what you want to see next, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye, friends.